understand the feeling of this obsessional repetition and slight panic that he had. I've been on holiday to Greece lots of times, and one of the things that I always really responded to emotionally was those shrines that you see on the road, and sometimes they're dedicated to saints, and sometimes they're to markate where an accident has taken place. So you'll get photos of the deceased person and flowers and candles, and they'd always really touched me. And so I said to Rob, I think it would be amazing to get these into the game somehow, and then Rob took that idea and ran with it, and I think they're so successful and they're so beautiful and they're really moving, and I think it's because you had this elemental scale, you have the island and it's huge and you have that scale, and all of a sudden you...
One of the really nice things about the move from the mod to the commercial version is that we had a couple of years worth of the community talking about the game before we went back into it again. And one of the things that I read on a forum was that someone had constructed this amazing version of the story where they'd decided that the narrator was Paul. And I hadn't thought of that. It was never part of the original writing. And I thought, that's so amazing that as a writer, your audience can find something in what you're doing that you hadn't thought of. So it was really important when we went back in to record the additional set of voiceovers. I thought, I absolutely want to do this. I want to take this idea that's come out of the fans and to run with this and to add an entire new sort of stream of story in there. So we added in a couple of cues within the fourth level that intimated much more strongly that actually Paul wasn't this other character who caused the accident, but actually you were responsible for everything. But again, it was then trying to find that balance of not overcooking it, so you weren't led to that idea, but just if you happen to have the combination of just a couple of narrative units, then you would possibly come to that interpretation. But it was really amazing to be able to say, it felt like giving something back to the fans that had enabled us to make the remake in the first place, and it's always a lovely moment as a developer to be able to recognise your fan community and kind of say, thanks, this one's yours, this one's here for you.
What's fascinating to me, Dan, is that you're an atheist, but each of the three games that we've made are so strongly about religion, either the language or taking allegories and stories. Why are you so drawn to it?
I think I'm really interested in people and the stories that make up people. And I think there is like in the Bible, like most kind of religious texts, it's not about what it is, it's about what is behind what it is, and that's what you're really getting to, is the idea of the sort of the parable or the metaphor. And it really felt like, particularly with Paul on the road to Damascus, is a story that many people know and we can understand, and it's about redemption and consequence and guilt and transformation and who you really are and what that means. And it felt like just a really strong... Is Dear Ester a depressing game or a hopeful game?
For me, it's kind of like a mix of both, really. I think, like, my interpretation is kind of like, always feel like kind of depressed when I think about the kind of turmoil that this guy's been going through for God knows how long, and the kind of environment he's been in, and, you know, all these events surrounding his story. But for me, I always feel like a little bit hopeful at the end. You know, the conclusion just feels like a relief. Like this is kind of all ended in some way. What do you think, Jess?
I think it's a game about acceptance, and I really like that. And I think it's telling that a lot of people with mental health issues have responded really positively to the game, and we get a lot of emails and letters from those people saying that it's helped them through a really difficult time. And for me, that's because it's about the struggle of being human.
So, Dear Ester is the first walking simulator. How do you feel about Walking Simulator?
You know what, I think I took offence to it when it first became a thing. But, you know, I think I don't mind it so much now. I think the fact that we have kind of taken ownership over it. Like that genre has been kind of made our own by not just our game, but like a bunch of different games have kind of embraced it. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Well, I'm still really confused about the need to categorise in games, probably more than any other creative industry, and I think it shows.
There's a bit of an illusion of simplicity with games like Dear Ester that people kind of assume, because there's not a lot of mechanics and there's not much going on in that sense, that they're easy to make. And I think actually it's kind of the opposite in a way, that because they're so simple, everything is exposed and everything has to be exceptionally good for it to work, because you're carrying a player's experience on a fairly sparse, minimal kind of framework, and that really means that every aspect of it has to be.
One of the things that I think was added more frequently in the final version of Dear Ester was the inclusion of a number of ghosts in the game. These are not like ghosts that you'd see in a normal horror game. They're just very loose silhouettes that you'll see around the island, usually like quite a distance off, or just kind of somewhere that you'd barely see it out the corner of your eye. I think this is a good example of where it's kind of really in your face, and these are kind of just something that we put in to kind of not just bring some unreal elements to the island, but something supernatural as well, something that's kind of beyond.
The overlook, the point about this to me is that it's probably the voiceover in the game that kind of sums up the whole story and the experience. It's almost like a recap of everything that's gone before you start the final climb, and you know it's that pause before you're going to start the final climb and before the game's kind of builds to a climax. But you can also see the whole level, and it's like the idea that you are standing looking down on your own journey, a bit like the idea of your life flashing before your eyes, or sort of like seeing your body but having an out-of-body experience at the moment of death. And it was really designed to try and get that feeling as the player, that you stop and you take stock of everything, and there's a bit of a sense of there's no going back. You take a breath and now it finishes. And I really wanted to kind of achieve that sort of sense, and I think we did. I think it really came together here, that you got that sense of going, right, now this ends and now I move forwards to it.
So here it kind of the environment becomes a little bit more surreal again. We kind of play with the colours a little bit, bring up the saturation. It's kind of a little bit of a return to some of the more cave-like aesthetics in terms of colours and stuff like that. And it's kind of there to kind of signpost another significant moment in the game, or something that's leading up to the significant moment. It goes back to this kind of idea of having these emotional signposts in the visuals of the game, without it being overly obvious. And some of that emotional stuff comes through.
The music that's playing here is a repeat of another cue, and originally we hear it played on the piano, and the string quartet take on the piece here. And it's one of those really nice instances where we were in the studio and I had this idea of how it was going to sound, and I thought it was going to be quite full and rich and full-bodied, and then one of the string players said to me, this is wrong actually for what we're playing. And they said, let's strip out all the vibrato, let's play it in a really Scottish, plain style. And it absolutely transformed that piece, and it's one of the really special things about being a composer, is that you get to collaborate with people who come fresh to it. So you have this preconceived idea of how it should be, and then they say, no, why don't we turn it around and think about it like this? And it absolutely fits and works for that scene, because what we're getting at this point is a sense of fragility, of an ending, and it's almost reminiscent of a funeral procession. It's slow and it's dirge-like, but yeah, it was just a lovely moment where they gave something.
It was possible that this last section of the game could have felt quite laborious and forced, because it's two long zigzagging paths that just go up, and there was a real importance to getting it right. Quite a lot of work went into it. I think at this point for me, you probably as a player understand that the narrator's going to die at the end, and that this is it. And that unlike where the rest of the island, there's this sense of this could just keep going on forever and ever and ever, and you're going to keep the motif of comeback.
With the climb being quite a poignant moment of the game overall and of the story, it was quite a difficult task to try and make that climb still interesting and not too laborious, because it's kind of this zigzag up there with nothing really. There's no real environment. You just kind of have the sea on one side and the cliff face on the other. So there was quite a lot of work that went into kind of building up this feeling of tension as you're rising and kind of making this moment as poignant as possible while still making it interesting. So a lot of effort was put into building up this weather, building up the winds and the swaying of the grass and kind of the volume of the soundscapes and everything mixing together with the music, and just kind of visually really trying to make this a tense moment. And I think it's hopefully been pulled off all right. And you'll notice when you get to the top, this kind of tension dies, and that's very purposeful. You'll see no more wind. It's just kind of like a symbolic thing where you're coming to the last moment, the point of no return, and that's been very deliberately designed that way.
We had a lot of debates, didn't we, about the ending of the game and whether the player should retain control or whether it was okay to go to a cutscene at this point. I personally don't mind it. I actually actively like it because I think it works really well as a metaphor for loss of control at that point. Dan, I know you're not as keen.
Yeah, I'm not. I would have loved the player not to have had control taken away from them, but to me it was a balance between two evils: the evil of having a cutscene and the evil of the player accidentally falling off the ladder halfway up and destroying the ending.
Yeah, I agree. I think we tried a few different things, and the tech at the time just wasn't, the ladder tech at the time just wasn't there. So, and the other thing for me was pacing. It was making sure all the music, the voiceovers, the timings and everything were perfect for that final jump off point. And just letting the players kind of noodle around going up a ladder for what may have been like 7 minutes, because it's a tall tower, was kind of an impossible task.
One of the things that I enjoyed the most on working on Dear Esther was Rob's beautiful visuals were so inspiring, but Dan's words are always so amazing to write to. I think that's where we start as a partnership. And the music at the end was so easy to write because that last voiceover, it's the pinnacle of the writing to me, as it should be, because it's the last VO, so you would have failed if it wasn't good. But it is just so beautiful and moving. And for me, talking about whether it's a hopeful ending, the music is really hopeful at this point, and it signifies to me transformation, freedom, escape, acceptance. Yeah, and it was just a beautiful cue to write, actually.
I don't know, I can't remember quite where it came from in the mod, but the moment when we went, or we could put the bird in there and you could see the bird's shadow, and actually it turned from being kind of like a straightforward literal suicide into a metaphorical, or to my mind, kind of like, I always really believed the narrator did turn into a bird just before they hit the ground, and that was really important. I think it's probably the strongest ending in any of our games so far. But yeah, I'm very proud of the way everything came together in that last section.
Yeah, I think it's the bird thing is particularly interesting because I think it was in the original mod, but the timings and everything were just all off, and you never really saw the seagull. Yeah, at least the shadow as well. It was all kind of like a little bit broken. And I remember when we went back in, I made a real effort to try and get that shadow just out of the center of the view, so you kind of have this hint of something happening, and I think you can hear the sound of a seagull flapping its wings. It's like very subtle, but like I say, I kind of really like the way that came together. It kind of it's very like say it's kind of like a release, but at the same time there's still this kind of ambiguity there that's kind of beautiful.
And I'm really proud that I got the monitor in at the end for ending of, it goes into the hospital monitor signifying the flat line. And I think it's it's one of those moments where you never want to be so clever that people notice it and it takes them out of the moment, but it just flows in through the music, and it just feels like everything comes together at that last point. That last VO, Rob's amazing visuals and the music, and it feels like a really, really strong and beautiful ending.
And then in the last second, Nigel Carrington's delivery of just those two words have come back, where he just pitch perfect.
Yeah. So that's the end of the director's commentary. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone for listening. We hope you've uncovered some secrets and some facts that you didn't know about the game before.
We'd also like to say a huge thank you for buying the game, and for all our fans who've been behind us and been behind the game and have kept it alive all these years. It's a real privilege that it's still out there, still such a title that people love so much.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to the future and what we can create coming up next. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.
Bye.